and it's just really very hard. Sort of just like experimenting on.
Chairman, I'll do the roll call vote. I'm the roll call for today.
Okay.
Director Emster?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Odell? Not present for the vote. Director Stone?
Present.
Thank you. Director Lockett? Not present for roll call. Director Adams? Not present. Director Robinson?
Present.
Thank you. Director Leggett? Not present. Director Taylor?
Present.
Thank you. And Chairman Cody?
Present.
Thank you.
F5. No. That's all right, though.
Now this is different from the actual one that we received, right? This is just a condensed version of what we received.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
We had a question. Vice Chair Stone have a question?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, though.
All right, so we'll be going into our proposed service changes presented by Mr. Jim Ritchie, WRA Consultants.
Great, thank you very much. We're going to talk about Title VI equity analysis and the proposed service changes, all in the same PowerPoint presentation today. I want to emphasize that this is all and will continue to be a work in progress. I'm convinced, as I have had good dialogue with bus operators and with your operations staff in some public community meetings, that there's a lot more we can do. That I am not at all convinced that you all won't have some of the better ideas that we haven't heard yet. So please be sure, if you see things that you don't think are being covered well, bring them up. Let's see if, because I think we can improve the services. Now, one of the things that I know I have continued to work on is access to the schools. I'm not convinced that all of the alignments that I've shown have gotten us all the way that we can get. So I hope access to schools and also access to other areas will also help us. Now, before we jump in to the meat of this material, I want to emphasize how important I think Title VI is and why it's a critical piece of the work that we do. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed really after some terrible times in America. In September of 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, 4 little girls were killed at the 16th Street Baptist Church. That bombing and the struggle in Birmingham really set the stage then after Kennedy's assassination for the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And what the Civil Rights Act told us is that we have to provide all of our services, whatever the services are, governmental services, have to be provided without regard to race, national origin. And to me, it's the most important piece of legislation that I think has been passed this past century. And so each time I work on it, I really reflect upon why are we doing it and why is it important. Now, today we want to talk about, along with our Title VI analysis, we want to talk about the Comprehensive Operations and Transit Development Plan recommendations. And we really have short-term goals that are coming out of the COA TDP. And the first is to restore service reliability. Second, that I think is really important, for people to be able to use transit services effectively, they have to be frequent enough. Once every 2 hours just is not a viable service for people. And I think we've got to try to make our services at a 30-minute frequency wherever we can. And then we've had real change in this community over the last 10 or 15 years, and we've got so many suburban jobs and opportunities that we've got to connect with. And really, the suburban jobs and opportunities have really outpaced how we fund transit as well. And so, but I think those are our 3 short-term goals. Now, our next steps, as I mentioned, I think in this plan, your questions or other feedback you have from other customers or bus operators can still really help us improve the proposals. We've done the Title VI service equity analysis, and there are no disparate or disproportionate impacts because all of it is relative. And I'm going to share with you what the real impacts are, but from a Title VI standpoint, we're not regulatory related issues.
Jim,
Now,
let me
yeah.
mention here too, just a reminder to the board, in the last committee meetings, we actually did go ahead and make sure that we talked about this. We said, you know, you're going to see from 2019 to 2023, which Jim has reflected up here in the work that we've done, you know, both the COVID impacts, then driver shortages that have continued since then, and those service reductions that we took in order to bring about reliability of the service. All of those things did have an impact, but the plan moving forward, and we were very honest and forthright about that. The plan, though, that we have to move forward really does not only bring us back to a healthy place, but really starts to create that system of growth and prosperity, frankly, for CAT that we all, I think, have a vision for.
Thank you, Faye. I very much agree. But the board is going to approve this equity analysis. And that is something that FTA requires, that the board thoughtfully consider the equity analysis for service changes and for fare changes. Then you're going to be setting up continuous improvements in the bus service. Now, it's really the pace that we're able to add drivers is really the key for us. We're down to 27 peak buses because that's really all of the drivers that we have been able to hire, recruit, train, and retain. And we were at, in 2017, 51 peak buses. So we're down roughly 50% in peak buses. From COVID, we're down about 50% in our overall service. But we can't add it back until we can get sufficient quantity of bus operators to man the service. While budget is an issue and continued resourcing is an issue, the real challenge is number of bus drivers. Why is that? Is it that CAT just isn't capable of hiring bus drivers? I don't think so. What's going on is nationwide, there are a lot of folks that are retiring, that have reached, the baby boomers are reaching the retirement age, and you know, driving a bus is just not something that you see as much as you had before. So retirement has really impacted us. COVID really impacted because operators were really worried about being out in public. And so we lost many operators because of their own personal fear. Other thing that I think has gone on, especially in Savannah, the deepening of the harbor dramatically increased the, let's see, Beverly, our screen went out. Here we go. The deepening of the harbor has dramatically increased shipping in the area. And I think we have just lost so many operators to the general growth in the number of drivers in this community. So we're competing in a much more difficult pace. But this, I want to emphasize, even beginning this plan moving forward, we're going to have to be really flexible in this service implementation, because we may not be able to get enough operators. And we may have to slow it up a little bit or speed it up a little bit, depending upon where we are with operators. Now, when we talk about the Title VI equity analysis, there are really 4 key terms for you to know. A major service change is plus or minus 25% of revenue hours or miles, or a new route is a major service change. A disparate impact is a relative negative impact 50% greater on minority riders than non-minority riders. Doesn't mean, because we've had a 50% loss in ridership, and most of those riders are minority riders that we have lost. It's not that, it's the relative change, not necessarily the absolute change, that tells us if we have a disparate impact. The same thing for disproportionate burden. It's a relative change, not strict loss in low-income riders. Now, the thing that certainly concerns me, and is that we've had significant loss in service, significant loss in ridership, that really has a very negative impact on minority and low-income populations. And that's really why I think it's so important that we figure out how to restore the most service that we can. Other thing to realize, FTA is introduced because of COVID, the term temporary. And so service changes that lasted less than a year were temporary, and fare changes that lasted 6 months or less were temporary. Well, your fare change lasted 8 months, for example, where you had free fares for 8 months. And so that's why a equity analysis is included for fares in this document. Now, the Title VI equity analysis document, and that is this document that you've had been passed out to you, covers the service changes since March of 2020 through July of 2023. It's intended to be an absolute catch-up on all of the changes that have occurred. Now, one of the most important changes that occurred is the one that's identified in August of 2020. And you'll see that we have cut back on evening service, and we called it a temporary service reduction in August of 2020. Well, what that really did is it reduced the span of service that buses were on the street. We went from many buses out on the street for 16 hours a day. And for 16 hours a day, you could have two drivers, one straight in the morning, one straight in the afternoon. Well, all of a sudden, we've cut back our runs to where they're 12, 13, 14 hours. And we have to, by definition, have a straight run and a split run. So your operators have really appropriately expressed, man, we got all these split runs now. And I just seem to have to come in early and work late. And that's one of the problems with us retaining drivers. But in this change, one of the most significant ones I see in what's affected CAT is that August 2020 night service reduction. Now, I'm not going to go through each one of these changes. They're described in the document, but none of them reach the thresholds, the disparate impact and the disproportionate burden. But together, they really generate significant loss for our customers.
And Jim, one other thing we should mention there, if you'll go back to that really quickly, Bev, thank you. One thing we should also mention here is, and not to overemphasize this, but I do think it's an important moment to take, especially since the public is engaged in our meeting today. We want to be sure that we reflect upon that as well. There is no doubt, as we mentioned in committee meetings, that all of this represents a lot of challenge that was before us. Some of it was COVID induced, some of it is just the market induced, and some of it is the continuing issues, as Jim's been describing, with operator shortages and so forth. But there were some good moments in this and good efforts that this board undertook that are remarkable, especially in the midst of challenge. And I want to be sure that we reflect upon those. One is certainly the expansion of fare-free service in Carver Heights and Cloverdale, and just the general expansion of the DOT shuttle for the first time ever outside of downtown and into neighborhoods where it could also provide connectivity and needed service. Then the other piece was the restoration of service to Savannah State. Jim mentioned earlier what a focus we had all during this effort and in the master transit plan effort from last month in terms of thinking about and aligning with whether it's the high schools, or our university system, our technical schools and so forth, how we can strengthen that relationship. That's core to economic prosperity and life growth for folk in our community. So I just wanted to be sure we did mention that there, in the midst of a lot of bleak moments that we've had over the last several years, we also have been able to accomplish some progress. Thank you.
Absolutely true. So this is a graph that shows both the bus revenue hours and the passenger trips. And it always depends upon what the relative start, what year you actually measure against. But by fiscal 23, our bus hours are down 41% and our bus rides are down 54%. And I believe I'm measuring that off of fiscal 19. Now, what to me in designing transit services is that frequent bus service really means people can use the transit service to reach opportunities. And frequent bus to me means improved access to opportunities. Now, for me, I define frequent bus every 30-minute service on weekdays, and certainly not more than an hour between buses on weekends and evenings. So that's kind of, I wanted you to hear my perspective. Some folks will say, oh no, you got to make it every 10 minutes for it to be truly frequent service. In communities this size, I think 30 minutes, if we can get our bus services running regularly at 30-minute frequencies, we can really give people access to opportunities. So part of this work is the CAT onboard survey. And I just wanted to just highlight a couple things from the survey here. One, of course, is the very high predominance of using CAT to get to jobs. 43% of your riders have said they were using it to get to jobs. The other is that we have a very high proportion of age 55 to 64 and 64 and older, but we have a very low proportion of 17 and under. And I think we are not getting the ridership that we can out of our high school populations. So generally, I get that from the survey. Next, I get from the survey that we are 56% black that are riding the services. Honestly, that is a lower percentage than many of the other systems that I've worked in. Winston-Salem, Durham, North Carolina are both systems I helped to manage, and we were a higher percentage of minority. That's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a observation. Just as other places, though, we also have a very high preponderance of people that use the transit service that are low income and that have limited access to an automobile. Those are two key equity things for us to realize in the service. Now, what did people say about our service? On the things that bothered me the most are the percentage of dissatisfied. That in this survey that was completed last December, we had 27% that were dissatisfied with saying it's comfortable and safe, 25% were dissatisfied with being reliable, that it was not frequent enough, and that it didn't really go to where people want to go. Those are the sort of things I hope 3 years from now, 5 years from now, when we do this survey again, we can have turned around, because we want people that are our customers to be very satisfied with the frequency of service and that it's going to where we want them to go. Now, this compared the riders, the long-term riders and the non-long-term riders. For example, for non-long-term riders, only 2.9%, 3% thought the fare was too high. But if you look at for long-term riders, 41% thought more frequent service is needed. And that, again, has been, to me, in looking at the service, one of the things we really need to try to deliver is more frequent service in areas where people will use the service. So now a couple of times, and I want to highlight, we have used generally 1/3 of a mile as the transit service area. Sometimes it's used at 1/2 of a mile, and other times it's used at 1/4 of a mile. So generally, I've used 1/3 of a mile in my work. The master transit plan used statistics that were 1/2 a mile from the transit service area. So you'll see in a couple of graphics where we use 1/2 a mile. So just realize there's a little bit of difference there, but there's still, the relative numbers are the same in the 1/3 or 1/2 of a mile. So this shows where you had every 30-minute frequency in 2018. So the MLK route, Route 25, the Abercorn route, and the Waters Avenue route were giving you 30-minute service, and then the DOT shuttle as well in 2018. With the service reductions that we've had, we're now only providing every 30-minute service in the Route 14 Abercorn service and the DOT shuttle. And so with that, really dramatic reductions in the access to opportunities. Now, why were those changes made? Honestly, because of number of bus operators that could man the services is what has driven those reductions. And you'll see in the recommendations that I have for you, let's get 25 back to every 30-minute service. Let's get to 27 back to every 30-minute service. I think the East Savannah routes, Route 31 and Route 10, can be back to 30-minute service. But all of this is going to require more drivers to get the service restored.
Jim, one thing too to interject here, and I know this is a little bit ahead of where you are in the presentation right now, but I want to it's a good time to be thinking about it, is that as we're looking at restoring frequent service on these core routes, we also are looking at something that'll have a different kind of metric to it now, but will be an equally important addition to the CAT's overall service profile, which is microtransit, which will be on demand. There's a couple of things that are important about that. One is the driver. It's a non-CDL driver in terms of the hiring potential and the pool of drivers that we would have access to. But the other is, rather than being measured as a part of frequent service, it'll be measured in terms of the zones and the connectivity within that zone per se that expands and helps to also offset some of these things that might historically have been that more fixed route type of service model. So I just wanted to be sure we're thinking about putting all those pieces together as we're moving through the presentation.
Okay?
Jim?
Yes, ma'am.
Since you mentioned the east side route,
Yes, ma'am.
I think also in the report to talk about changing the Eisenhower loop with 31, go to 4 Barnard. There were some other adjustments that would increase the time for those major heavy traffic like 31 and 10. Is that?
Yeah, it is, and I want to share with you at least what my concept was in the change, and I want to make sure I also point out what's negative. What are we losing in it? What will customers say, oh, I don't like this as well? And I think the 31, for example, extending from the Walmart over to the mall is a piece that we're taking away and making people transfer that want to make that connection from Skidaway over to the mall. I want to make sure I highlight for you what is negative and where I'm at least proposing some things that I think can mitigate that. But at any rate, yes, Dr.
That's not me for asking, because I was concerned about how, even though you changed the route, those folks who are used to a certain way of getting it, how do they connect to the next available bus?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
In a timely manner,
And that's where I also, you'll see that I've tied improvements to the frequency on Route 4 to making this change on 31, right? Because we've got to be, and there's some really important county facilities between the Eisenhower area. And we've got to, I was trying to make sure I timed Route 4 improvements to get us to at least hourly service on Route 4 at the same time that we pull 31 out of that area. I'm not convinced it's perfect in what I'm proposing, but I want to make sure we point out what we're changing. And then, as a board, you may see, well, that consultant's got some good ideas, but we know better. Our community knows better, and that's all okay. Because that's why you're here as a board, is to try to give the customers and our citizens the best service. Okay, but anyway, we'll get to that in just a minute. Now, in the, we'd love to see all of this service in place in 2024. But you'll see now we're labeling this plan 2024, 2026, because I'm afraid it may take longer because of the number of drivers and other resources to get there. But here are the things, the 30-minute frequency corridors that I would love to see within the next year to year and a half to 2 years. To get Route 3B to Groves High School running at a 30-minute service, I think can do very well. Route 3B then would extend on to Port Wentworth, but it's the Port Wentworth end ends up being just at every hour frequency. Like to see the Route 10 to East Savannah at a 30-minute frequency. Route 14 is already at a 30-minute frequency. I want to see Route 25 at a 30-minute frequency. The Route 27, the Route 31, and then of course the DOT shuttle. But making that happen, because we've got to pull service out of a number of areas. The islands, for example, White Marsh and Wilmington Island. We're going to pull Route 10 back from there. In order to do that, we've got to have this microtransit zone to be able to serve that area. We're going to have direct service on Route 3 to the airport. Well, in order to do that, we've got to have a microtransit zone in West Chatham so that we can pull the bus off of Jimmy DeLoach and go directly to the airport. But this integration between microtransit and the bus service is all what is really important in doing this. And when, actually this morning, I learned that I think we're going to be a little bit later and when we actually can launch microtransit, probably in the May timeframe.
That's right.
And so that changes my thinking. I can't take away the service on Jimmy DeLoach in March if we're not going to have microtransit until May.
Yeah,
So,
we are going to be doing some microtransit, paratransit launch prior to that May date as a part of an improvement to paratransit service and utilizing the technology that Georgia Tech is building out, customized for our system that Dr. Meany is working on. But then you're correct, Jim. I think we think it'll be somewhere in that May, but perhaps a little sooner time frame that we actually go live with the 3 zones, the 2 West Chatham, the East Savannah, and then a little bit later time frame for the islands too.
okay.
Jim, and
Yes, ma'am.
something, I'm big on words and terms.
Yes, ma'am.
I think our public is used to paratransit, fixed route. Can you define microtransit just for the?
Yep. Microtransit is a on-demand service that incorporates a app to be able to call the bus. You can still make reservations by phone, but it's all really incorporating the technology that the cellular phones give us. And you measure microtransit in a close area, relatively close, and you're trying to get customers picked up within 15 to 30 minutes from when they say on the app, I need this bus to come and pick me up. It's shared ride service, so you're not on the vehicle alone, but you may be on the vehicle alone. It is very similar to Uber and Lyft in the way that the service will operate. Director Adams.
That's what I wanted you to describe. And it's similar to Uber and Lyft.
Okay, now, what's different about it than Uber and Lyft is that these will be CAT employees who pass a background check, who go through a regular supervision, who have regular drug and alcohol testing, so that we're ensuring that we've got really good quality operators out in the field. That's really what will set it aside as different.
And CAT vehicles that are well maintained, all those kinds of things that people would think of the CAT brand. do that.
Yeah.
On demand, just like you would Uber or Lyft.
And the vehicles will be ADA accessible. It is, yeah. And Dr. Manny just said, remember, what you pay for an Uber or Lyft, it also is all demand-based, and you can pay, any particular price. This will be comparable CAT fares
CAT fares,
for the Uber and Lyft, or for the microtransit
So the price point is quite
service.
different.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And we heard that, Director Lockett, in all of the public meetings on both this and in the master transit plan effort, is that was one of the positives that we kept hearing from all different parts of the community, is that they felt like riding that with CAT would be a more secure environment than any of the other sort of private products, if you will, that are out in the market.
But the one thing you as board members, this introduction of microtransit, I love the folks that are doing it, but it's not going to be without problems. Right? We're going to have some challenges, and we're going to have some customers that probably don't get everything they think they're going to get. And we got to really work to make sure that we're providing the quality service we want.
That's
Dr.
true.
Robinson.
I guess one of the challenges that I would ask is if we're having trouble getting paratransit and fixed route drivers, or even the drivers to implement, and I can see what when you said about being flexible in the implementation, we want to do these things, but we're already challenged in that end. This creates a greater challenge.
Well, yeah, what the microtransit does is we're able, and we've been more successful in recruiting non-CDL drivers. And so the microtransit requires non-CDL drivers. You're not driving a vehicle of 15 passengers or more. So we think by having the non-CDL, we'll be able to recruit more. Now, we've also just implemented, and I think Dr. Manny is waiting for Thursday of this week when he's having the first tests, right, of non-CDL folks that have gone through the testing. And maybe I should have mentioned that as one of the reasons we're having problems getting getting CDL drivers is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration a year ago changed the rules. And the rules that they changed were that you can't just go out and have training and go to the Motor Vehicle Administration and get your CDL. You now have to take training from a certified CDL training program before you can go over. So all of a sudden with this new CDL training requirement, we had to, for example, here at CAT, get accredited so we could give CDL training. But that's, Dr. Robinson, absolutely the case that we're thinking, I got all this planned, and it really is conditioned on, do we have enough bus operators?
Jim, one other thing we should mention for the benefit of all the board members and to Dr. Robinson's really good question is, Dr. Manny, you may want to comment on the classes that we've got coming up and the amount of folks that we've already got ready for those classes, because I think what it shows is a promising sort of future. And it also aligns with some of the recent metrics, labor metrics that have been coming out of the recent forecasts that show that something is starting to loosen up and change again in the labor market, which is a good thing for everyone.
Yeah, and I would like to share this with the board that for the first time, I'm more happier than before. We have, since I've been here, we have a class size of 12 students, and that will complete all our paratransit 42 drivers. This class is starting the 21st, and training will be 4 or 5 weeks. And we got vehicles coming in, and we got all staff, so paratransit will be good. And as we move on, yeah.
And if paratransit is good, microtransit
Microtransit
can
is
also
good,
be good
yeah.
because it's the same driver profile
Well,
and so
yes.
forth. And in fact, I think that, you know, we can be competitive with some of the folks that are out there doing rideshare driving right now that might think that they might like a different sort of employment arrangement to do that. I think that there's lots of opportunity there for us, but great questions. Thank you, Dr. Meany.
Now, jumping forward, we hope 26 to 28, we're going to have grown from 27 peak buses to 37 peak buses. And we, in the 26 to 28 period, we're also able to add this new Route 4 South Side, but it's really in conjunction with each of the other changes. And I'm going to summarize these performance indicators for the equity performance indicators in just one more minute. And then long run, we'd like to get back to 43 peak buses. And the what's frequent here is Route 4, Bernard, is able to become a every 30-minute service. Route 12, Victory, is able to become a every 30-minute service. And that's critical because we've got a number of high schools, got 2 high schools that are on Route 12 that are really important. We're able to add service in the 17 corridor, the Silk Hope corridor. Those are the things that get the additional 30-minute frequency in the long run. Now, I'll also tell you, I don't think we can, with the current revenue streams, I am really hopeful that we can get to this 37 peak buses with the current revenue stream. It's, I think, a challenge. To get beyond this, I think we have to have additional revenue to make it to this plan as 43 peak buses that I'm showing in 2028 to 2030.
That's operating revenue.
That's operating revenue.
Operating
So-
revenue. So for the benefit of the public that's listening to this, this is not some of the grants that we get for capital and those kinds of things. This is operating revenue.
And so it's really key that right now we've got some COVID money that are still helping us to continue for a while. But we will hit a cliff. The fiscal cliff will come, and we have to have ultimately more operating revenues to get back to 43 peak buses. And again, remember, we were at 51 in 2017. Yes?
2 questions. One is, was there any thought into, now that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 30-minute frequency routes, would that maybe be a time to graduate the Abercorn route into like a 50-minute frequency and just sort of like continue to sort of march them all together? Just throwing that out there. Because it is such a backbone route. And then the other one is, it'd be interesting to know what would be an appropriate millage rate to create a 2028 scenario that was fiscally balanced, and how would that? Is it like 2 mills? Or what? I have no idea, but I'd be interested to know. Not that is necessarily the pathway that we should take or would take, but how much more are we talking about?
There's actually some post master transit plan and post COA TDP financial modeling work that we are working on with InfoStrategies and with our CFO to do some of that kind of projection and forecasting in collaboration, of course, with all of our partners that are necessary. The other thing I want to be sure that we suggest is, I know Jim's talking about what we used to have as peak buses. And I think what we remember, one of our goals here was to be sure that we began to really focus in on our most successful, our high ridership routes, and we build those up. We build the strength of those while we're building out something different. Everything doesn't need or shouldn't have a fixed route, because that's not the best tool to use in every single area. So the notion of making sure that we had a really strong fixed route system that serves the areas it needs to and serves it the very best it can, a really strong paratransit system, and now bringing in microtransit as well was just how that now starts to overlay into a different kind of, much more robust and connected system than what we've certainly had in the past, when the business model, frankly, for transit was different versus the future that we're headed toward now.
Jim, when we talk about
Yes, ma'am.
the need for increasing income, when I think about, we talk about the route going into Fort Wentworth, does that mean that Fort Wentworth will be paying into the tax base, which would be an increase?
The way that we are approaching that now, and that was actually that email that I had mentioned earlier today, Director, about sitting down and talking as a group about how we look at service expansions moving into the future. I think the approach that we're taking right now, remember, is we've got IGAs, one of which this board has already approved with Garden City, where we did a service expansion there. The same sort of implementation, rather than the transit, the special services transit tax district, that an IGA where M&O funding becomes the funding source for that may be the way that those kinds of service expansions proceed, while there's still a contemplation that has to be done with the community, including and led by this board, but in the community of how do we really want to fund CAT into the future. I think that's the real question that we're begging here.
Okay, IGMNO.
M&O, maintenance and operations funding, general fund money. Yes,
But
ma'am.
Intergovernmental agreement.
An intergovernmental agreement, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine with me, but, I'm hoping you're not just talking to me because everybody else is listening, so I just want to make sure. But again, and I know this is projection, what we plan to do, what we hope to do. And my point is, but, when we deal with these counties, the different counties who are not paying into the tax base, we run to what we ran into with Garden City as well. So hopefully it'll pan out. And the other thing with the connections with the schools,
Yes, ma'am.
I think, the reason why I think that's another, are we gonna charge students, are we gonna charge a lesser rate for students, or would it be fair
Now-
free, or what?
To me, I would love to see you follow the same progress as one of my other clients. And this is Montgomery County, Maryland, Ride-On, Rockville, Maryland. And they have decided to have fare free for seniors and for students. And any of the students in community college or in high school are able, through their institutions, to get free rides. And I think that's ultimately something that I hope you will consider, and free rides for seniors as well. Our senior population is growing remarkably, and I think it can really mean real mobility for people. So the other thing that Ride-On did this past year, they were always tracking with the Metro fares. Whatever fare Metro had for Metro Bus, they were keeping exactly the same fares. And after COVID, their board said, we're not doing that anymore. We're going with $1 fare. So a flat dollar fare is what they are collecting. Now, Ride-On is carrying, you're up to 6,000, 7,000 riders a day. They're at 70,000 riders a day. It's a very robust system. But transit fares generally don't generate a whole lot of real revenue for us. And so the real benefit that we want from our riders is for them to get to opportunities. And let's make it as low a fare as we can. So anyway, I would love to see you adopt a free fare for students and a free fare for seniors. But that's not incorporated. That hasn't been part of my work. But I'd love to see you do it.
And Dr. Robbins, so we are going to be bringing forward some consideration, some items, some proposals for the board to consider, specifically around students. We're planning to bring something forward in, hopefully in September, for the board to look at. That would be a semester-long pilot of some sort. And so we are thinking about those kinds of things. But again, this gets back to the point that you, I think, made very well just a little earlier, which is, you know, we're moving CAT's growing, and that's a great thing. Our service expansions, though, are happening in this way of the intergovernmental agreements that we're putting in place and securing local funding through local jurisdictions or through entities like the schools, whatever it might be. And at some point, we're going to come to a question that if we want to accomplish all the things that we're kind of putting forward, it's the how do we want to fund CAT.
And the reason I'm kind of asking about the schools, because I think it's a good audience and it will increase riders, only because in Chatham County, you have specialty schools where parents are just trying to figure out how can I get my kid to the school. And if we market it right, and I think we should market to the parents and not to the school board. I think we should market to the parents, make them aware of this great ride, the safe ride. You see, because I think you can increase ridership by
Agree.
going to these different schools and these different areas.
Absolutely agree.
Dr. Yes, thank you, sir. Piggybacking on Dr. Robinson, are there any grants out there to move this through?
Not necessarily specific for grants. There could be. But right now, that's one of the reasons why we're staying so heavily, especially on the federal side, looking at all of these grant opportunities to make sure that if there's something that we can bring forward that makes a good fit for the kinds of opportunities that this board wants to direct, like connecting students, and especially even doing things like connecting students to where they're doing the college work while they're still in high school, making sure they get, because that's oftentimes a trip that parents struggle to try to your point, Dr. Robinson, they struggle to be able to make that extra trip in the day to connect their high school child over to, you know, Georgia Southern or Savannah State or where they may be doing some of that work. So, Director Adams, that's a great question. I want you to know we're constantly scanning the environment for that and looking for it. To date, there's not necessarily specific ones, but there are grants that we can kind of take and contrive around that. Honestly, a lot of times, though, they're not for operations, and that's really where we need the support and assistance. And then that comes back to you know, again, sort of how do we want to, what are all the things that we want CAP to do and do well? And then how do we fund it in the measure that's needed to accomplish that?
Now, I'm going to show in a little bit a graphic of the schools and the frequency of service that we would have at each of those schools. Again, as I've worked on that, I think there's more that we can do. So I'm not, please don't see that as absolute, we're done. But I think, Dr. Robinson, that exactly your point, because of the opportunity for students to go to different programs and different schools, if we can make transit really frequent, I mean, if you're trying to get the kid to school and it's once every 2-hour service, they're even, I mean, I'm not even convinced that 30-minute service, I'm going to keep the 15-year-old's attention that long.
That's another place where microtransit, though, can become a part of how we make that connection. Absolutely.
All right, let me keep, or,
Yeah,
go
keep
ahead.
going. I'll bug you later.
So, all right,
No.
we lost the screen again. This graphic is just showing the time frame of when I'm proposing changes. And this will likely, change again over time with the number of operators that we're able to have. And I'll wait till this comes back. There we go.
we all have this, and it's still being displayed for Helen and
Yes.
Zipper watching, so I think, I mean, we could probably,
You can,
if you're, if,
Let me just get a
you've
paper
got,
copy.
you've got a,
I got a paper copy right here.
Yeah.
Right here. Ready? Go. I'll keep going. Okay, so, this, I have page numbers on it, isn't that terrible? The graphic says phased improvements is the one we were just looking at. The one after it shows the frequent service area comparison for key equity indicators. It's the one with the red graph and the green, and it just shows how dramatic in the frequent service area, how much we have lost since 2018.
and this is
What?
one that we've shared with the board previously that did in fact, this was part of our committee's conversation too, but we've shared this one previously to show what that impact has been. And it, as I've said in the committee meetings, really dramatic as Jim is describing. And the opportunities for us to really recover are there and have got to be our strongest attention.
And these numbers are bodies on the
Yes.
buses.
Yes, this is from the census data that we have.
or bodies around the buses.
And this is from 2018 to,
Mile of the bus.
Yes.
yeah, this is from
third of a mile of the
2018
bus
to
route.
2023, so it has occurred over that whole period of time.
The next page is another version of the equity analysis. This is using the master transit plan half a mile of area. And I guess since I have it back,
Jim, can we also, before you move forward, because I know that the screen went out about that time, can we go back for just a minute? Because I don't think the board, I wanted to be sure the board had an opportunity to see one more. The board, right here, on the phased improvements. Of course, the rest of these routes are ones that I know you're all really familiar with, and the understanding of that change that Jim is describing in this report is there. But if you go all the way down to the bottom, I wanted to be sure that we noted that the Suburban Express, that is a part of that, getting people who are Chatham County and doing it in that very efficient way. That's not a multiple stop type service. It's a home-based work trip type service. And that is the service that we are presently working with Hyundai to, in particular, but it's not just Hyundai, it's Hyundai and their 50 to 60 suppliers that are locating all around them. Jim and I were in a meeting with them last Friday, and there's a strong interest there to make that connection for folk in Chatham County and for them to support CAT in helping them to do it. So,
okay, let me just keep going here. I'm going to jump to this one, and I want to just highlight again. Where we're trying to go is families in poverty within a half a mile of 30-minute service. Increase up to 5,000 families, a 61% increase over 2019 levels, much more than that over the spring of 2023 levels. The minority population, also a 61% increase. The access to households without an automobile, an 88% improvement. The increase in schools that were really focused on the 30-minute service, and with this comes a tremendous access to jobs in the 30-minute frequency as well. Now, one of the things I do want you to see on the mapping that we show is that there's a national database that is the Housing Preservation Database of subsidized housing, because housing is not just through a large public housing complex. Much of housing is provided through the private sector in rent vouchers. And so this program gives us the number of units that are subsidized through the various programs. And that was a real focus for our work, is where we saw housing units that are subsidized that are not served by transit, trying to change the routes to be able to serve them. And that's why you get a remarkable increase in the number of subsidized housing units too.
Where is that?
I'm going to show you on the, let me get to these maps. Let me see if I can find one that's got, see this map here? See these little chevrons with, and where can I? You don't think the pointer works?
That's interesting. That's a cool data.
You see the, right, but we really focused on where are those subsidized housing. And one that, for example, see the one all the way up 95, up to 95 on Portland or 3B, 36 housing units that are subsidized, it's just above 95. Those are the sort of things that we were looking at. And I'll show you one on Route 25 that I thought was really important. But the number of subsidized housing units is a key factor in what our planning was. But I'm going to jump back, if I can, to this graphic. So we looked at each one of the schools, and by fiscal 28, which will have service and what frequency those services would have, or those schools would have. So the green check just means it has 30-minute service or better. There are Jenkins High School, there on Durin, for example, is off of Route 11. And the best we were able to get was a 40-minute frequency on Route 11. That's what we show here. If we can add one more bus, we can get the frequency down to about 20 minutes on the service. So, but this just shows where we are with the different routes. One of the really places that I thought was also important is the ones on Route 10, the Savannah Early College High School. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. The Savannah Early College High School and Liberal Studies, both off of Pennsylvania Avenue there in East Savannah. Those are ones that I really thought, boy, it's important that we try to get this frequency for. One other one that I'm still concerned about, and I make sure I've got the right school, but it's on Route 12 over here near Ogeechee, and it is Johnson. Nope, it's Beach. It's Beach High School. I'm really wondering why we're not having Route 17 also serving Beach High School in here, because I think it would really improve access. And there was another school that's over here near Savannah State.
That's Johnson.
That I also am not satisfied we've got enough frequency of service for. So a little bit of my point on this graphic is that I think we've got to keep focusing on frequent service for the high schools. And I think when we put this service in that we're planning, we better listen to parents and really try to see how else can we improve the service. Anyway, my point here is just, I think we've gone a great deal, but maybe not enough. Yes, Director Adams.
Okay, you mentioned the Savannah State and Johnson. Why is one Route 12 and why is the other Route 11? I mean, to get to Savannah State, you gotta go by Johnson.
Well, we went to Savannah State on La Roche, on the west side is why we don't get there. And I think you're also right, though, that maybe we need, but the Route 12 is all tied up in the tax. And we cut Route 12 back because of Thunderbolt, because we couldn't have stops in Thunderbolt. And I didn't put that back in here. I think we should ultimately, but it's a matter of but so the best way I had to get to Savannah State was there on La Roche. And we did start that service the 17th of July. I went by at lunchtime today. The bus stop is in place there on
It is.
La Roche at Savannah State. And
But the bus is not going on the campus, they're going to the gate.
going to the gate.
Right.
Going
Because
just,
there's already a stop at Skidaway and, where the lesson runs
And
into
we,
the road.
and we added another.
Really? So
But
it kinda
didn't
turns
we
in-
ended up with 2 over there, that's
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah, because it's a further walk, but if you got one closer, that's even better. But to his point is, to me, to have 12 go to Beach and 12 go to Johnson, that's just,
No, I got the
that's a
numbers
big
mixed
wide
up.
difference,
Yeah,
because
I
you're
got
talking
the
about going from the east side to the west side and back, so I think we need to relook at 12 should kind of stay on the east side.
But
Mm-hmm.
and then find
it's
a
the
route.
east-west route.
Yeah, but think about the distance between, just the mileage from between the 2 schools, and if you're trying to get 30 minutes out of that, both schools have that possible.
Would there be 2 buses on there?
yeah, well, yeah, there'll be
Yeah.
multiple buses on
Yeah.
there. But
Okay.
for the most part, your service is kind of on a north-south. We really only have one route that doesn't come downtown that connects across, and that's Route 12. Route 6 is very much on the very south, west side, but Route 12 provides that connectivity without having to go downtown.
So that's a great segue to one of my questions. You've been looking at these routes a lot, and if you could put the ITC anywhere in Chatham County for best flow, where would you put it? And do you think that its location downtown is best suited to the flow of the system? I know that's a potentially large question, but I've always thought it's a lot for every bus to go downtown, which is like our most congested area. And if we're trying to put together some long-term plans, having a plan for that. could
Well,
be interesting.
you have multiple transit centers today. They're called Walmarts, right?
That's a good point.
Right? And we have a good transit centers at the Montgomery Cross Walmart, at the Abercorn Walmart, at the one on Ogeechee Road. I mean, we've fortunately been able to get Walmart stops well located. I do think we need to think about how we can improve some of those. The other one that I really think we need to improve as more of a transit center is at the mall. It's not, we don't need to necessarily build an off-street site. Sometimes if we work really well on road configuration, we can do that. Now, CAT's about to start on a inventory of all of your stops.
That's great.
And the inventory is going to look at the condition of the stops and whether they're ADA accessible or not, and develop a program of improvements. I hope, Faye, that work can include really improvements of our kind of super stops, our stops that can be transfer locations for customers. I do think the ITC is located in a very good area. The guy that was your general manager, Scott Lansing, trying to make all of that happen, He was a bus driver with me at UVA a long, long
wow.
time ago. And I had talked to Scott a number of times about the struggles that they had. He wanted it closer in downtown. He didn't want it as far to the east.
It was
as it
going to
got.
be where the Cultural Arts Center is now, and the arena was going to go where ITC is. I mean,
Really?
it's all very, obviously, as you can imagine, like all the sites
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
major
yeah.
civic places were kind of there.
But, and I think you're, as a community, don't need a ITC.
You have to have mobility hubs.
You have to have.
That's
like
an
a-
interesting point.
Yeah.
I mean, also just looking at this graph as well is that you've got all this you've got all this north-south movement, and then you have the dot shuttle, which is offering the highest frequency very reliably, and it's already taking care of like a third of that entire north-south movement. And so I could almost imagine if the buses if none of the buses really went downtown and the dot shuttle got everybody up to all the way downtown, it just seems that downtown's really well covered, maybe too much, which is pretty crazy for me to say because I feel like I've been so focused on downtown. And real quick, but this idea of moving towards not having an ITC, but sort of mobility hubs around, doesn't seem like a bad idea.
Although I haven't included it in this work. Faye had asked me to look at a connection on Durin, a BRT type service on Durin. And it would go from the medical offices to Hunter Air Force Base, Savannah, Tech, and the mall.
BRT.
Bus Rapid Transit. Thank you.
Dr. Robinson is going to keep us on point with using government acronyms.
And that could be a fairly frequent 10 or 15-minute frequency service. It could provide, right now we've got a good connection of the 12 that's on Henry. And to provide another east-west connection, I think on Durin, really is a good idea, especially with the strong medical centers and then over to the mall. I thought that was something that was viable. It is it's pretty expensive in terms of the operating cost and the capital. And I guess I decided not to even bring it, after we explored it, not to bring it forward too strongly, because I wanted to see you focus on more frequent service across the community.
And it
instead of one area.
wouldn't be short range like this, or more, shorter range anyway. What we've done with that bus rapid transit concept is we have provided it to the city. The city is still working very diligently to get the Durin Avenue project that's been on the books for years and years and years and years moving forward. And this is exactly the right time that if that kind of a transit component of an overall corridor improvement is going to be contemplated, it's a good time to do that. But it's something that needs to be done through the work that's already being done by the city of Savannah as the proponent of that Durin Avenue project. So we are working closely with them and have provided a concept and are just having some, what I would call very high level kind of conversations around that. And then to the point that Jim made also, that the bus route, bus inventory, one of the things that many of you, as a matter of fact, I think every single board member has at some point talked to us about stops and shelters and the condition of them, and places where there just is not adequate infrastructure, all those kinds of things. So we really wanted to put some real emphasis on that for this fiscal year. And have that bus, both the inventory that a comprehensive inventory that desperately needed to be done, along with the bus amenities guidelines, which have not been updated since, Beverly, keep me straight on this, was it 2015? I think it was 2015.
I think it was 12, I thought.
Well, anyway, it was a long time ago. So we are making sure that all those things are moving forward together to bring forward to you as a board for consideration in the future. That's about a 6-month project, but pretty quick project in the grand scheme of, we got 1,700 or so stops and so forth. So, and then in terms of the ITC itself, as we are reimagining that space down there in our collaboration with Greyhound and their need for reduced space, you know, that originally was your home as a board. That was a really incredibly small boardroom without adequate space for public engagement and so forth. And this room is not a permanent solution. So one of the things that we're doing is, as we're reimagining the interior of the ITC with the expanded space that'll be available under Greyhound, is creating a really fine boardroom that also can serve as community meeting space and so forth for the frequency of public engagement and so forth that we oftentimes have to do. So just know that there's a lot of, I think, good news coming around that. And we're negotiating right now, working with the city on an adequate parking arrangement down there. So, which is, I'd say Director Adams is nodding. That's the first thing you think of when you think of the ITC, is the parking. And so we are working with them now on what will become a more permanent arrangement for CAT that will make sure that the parking situation is adequate, both for our personnel who are down there now in the call center, as well as for meeting times and so forth that may be forthcoming in the future.
I've got one, can I ask a question? We got the, how late are buses running under these scenarios?
Good point.
Absolutely.
Generally, current time,
Ew.
at 8 o'clock or so. Now, talking with the union and with operations, if we could get to 16-hour duration, so 5 a.m. to around 9 p.m., we could turn all these splits into straights. That's would take about 25% more operators
Okay.
to get there. And so in order to try to mitigate a little bit the problem with the splits, in this pick that's coming up for November, we're going to look and see, are there any runs where we can add an hour or so, morning or evening, and get us to the point where we can be reducing split runs. So I'm not trying to offer a absolute everything runs until 9 o'clock, but right now the 14 does. But we're going to need to see what else. I'd love to see the 25, things that are be the frequent corridors, the 25, the 31, the 10. We need to stretch that evening time out, but we need to stretch it along with the strategy on trying to reduce split runs for drivers, so that we can, because that's one of the biggest problems you have in retaining drivers, is everybody's got to work a split.
And a split is where you work in the morning and the evening?
Yes.
That doesn't sound
And you
fun.
have that break in the middle of the day, so you have to
It
come
kind
back.
of sounds like it would be more money, but not so many more people. Although you did just say it is more people, yes.
It's about 20% both more drivers
And more money.
and more money to run your evening duration. I have a graphic. I had too much in here already.
Yeah.
Than to pull that one to show it to you. But I was not trying to give you a policy. You know, a lot of times we do the span of service as a policy and say we want to run it this long. I wanted to do it pragmatically for you. Both where could we add trips where we think we have customers for them, and at the same time, if we add a trip, can we make it so that I can turn this run into a straight and a split to two straights. And when two straights, then the drivers are much happier than with as many split runs. But it's the duration I'm suggesting to you right now, just because I think we're in I don't want to go too heavy to it
Yeah.
because we can't handle the number of bus drivers for it.
No problem.
The Oglethorpe Mall should have a transit hub. I think it is really not necessarily on the mall property, but at Hodgson area, and I think we really have got to look at how we can. My understanding is on the mall, we're only allowed to have 2 routes. And that's another one that I'd hope ultimately we might be able to revisit, whether we can do better, because right now we're under the parking garage at the mall.
Is that
But-
their rule or our rule or a space thing? We just don't have space?
This, at least Ashley had explained to me before, that was a piece of history in the negotiation for the mall as to how many bus routes that you could have there. Now, it could be that that's a piece of urban legend that we can ignore, but it's just one
Something.
that we haven't
But going on the mall
explored.
properties, you know, then we're on private property and we're subject to their rules. And that even happened this year. We had something with Publix where we were doing a turnaround related to, I think this was related to the St. Patrick's Day service. And that became an issue of how we operated even to do a turnaround or have a stop or whatever. So anytime we get on mall or, you know,
Yeah.
Walmart though tends to be much more amenable, but you know what I'm saying? There's complications, there are urban legends and otherwise.
No, it's true.
Chick-fil-A.
It's true.
That's true.
All right, that
Chick-fil-A what?
That
We should
property,
just
that Chick-fil-A
Run a
property.
Chick-fil-A, that'll pay for all of it.
No, but it's, no, the property is vacant. They moved from the mall.
But
Director Adams, you had a question?
I do think doing some level of more intense study at the mall for whether you call it a super stop or a transit center, would be really helpful. And I do think it really helps to serve the South Side services that we were contemplating.
So as for a transit center, you're thinking that we need to buy some property?
You know,
I always think we should buy property.
we've got to be able to safely get people across the street to transfer. There are some good places on Skidaway, for example, that we do pretty well. That the crosswalks are adequate, the lighting is adequate, but there may, and that's really what I first want to look for, is can we find an on-street location that we can make the bus circulation work well enough for a transit center?
Have to get people to the other side. I'd never thought about that.
Jim, one other thing to comment on that relates to, I think, Director Adams' comment too, is the experiences you and I have had in Atlanta with joint use. I think in addition to buying property is certainly one piece of things, but there's also really good opportunities in joint use arrangements, especially with places that have excess capacity that works really well for this use. And Jim and I had experience in the Atlanta market doing that as well.
Join the meeting.
Are we on that subject about a hub or once Port Wentworth comes on board, we probably gonna have to look at the same thing. For Port Wentworth, Garden City, and the west
Well,
side.
Thank you for
And
bringing it.
hopefully Pooler will come on board, if anybody's out there listening.
Now, let's jump to Route 3 and the Port Wentworth Transit Center. Because it's actually part of the plan and it's a existing facility. So we're gonna jump to Route 3.
Route 3, not 3B. Route 3.
Well, 3 and 3B are related there. Yes.
Can you explain the difference between the Walmart's location
The Walmarts, I believe, the bus stops were conditioned as part of a development plan. So in order to build the Walmart, your zoning and planning folks said, you've got to have this bus stop plan there. The one on Abercorn is a good example where the bus stop is planned on the side of the building. The one on Montgomery Cross, I think, is the same way. And so, especially when you have a new development coming, it's really important for CAT to engage with the city and getting those stops
Well,
essentially required as
And
part
Jim,
of the
and Jim,
plan.
it's not just the city, it's the county too. And the good news with that is that we are currently working with both MPC and their site plan review responsibilities, the county and the city in negotiating as a matter of fact, I think it's very near term when this will occur, that we will be back if we didn't, I don't know if we ever, I haven't got a clear understanding if we lost this somewhere along the way or if it was just never formalized. But we will have a formal role in site plan review so that those very kinds of things, we can be sure that we're consistently commenting on it and making sure that CAT's interests and infrastructure needs are addressed and conditioned upon development activity. But we're super close to that being finalized again.
That's very cool.
It
That's
is.
very,
We've been
Very
working on
cool.
that for a few months, but we're now, I would say, within weeks of that being in place.
But I'm not sure of the arrangement at the mall. I think the arrangement at the mall was some form of lease or negotiation that enabled CAT to have the stop under the parking deck. But the real thing you want to try for again is you want to make it as part of the development agreement so that it goes with the zoning. And if the zoning changes, or if the property turns over, the zoning doesn't turn over and the requirement stays.
Yeah.
Say, this is Ty Butler. I will just tell you that with regard to Oglethorpe Mall, there were more routes there, and it actually was working pretty well for CAT and for the customers, the passengers. But the mall management decided that there was too much congestion there, both vehicular traffic and passenger congestion, and they kind of said, okay, we'll renew our contract, but we won't fewer routes going through.
Thank you, Ty. Appreciate all that history.
Okay, I was trying to show and I might jump to 3B instead. And the aerial here doesn't do it justice. But here in Port Wentworth, just before it's on Crossgate, just before you get to the railroad, the town has built a concrete truck turnaround that is on Crossgate. It's just past the Amazon on one side and the other distribution center on the other side of Crossgate. Port Wentworth has offered that to us as a location where we can have the Route 3 to turn around as well as the microtransit to connect. So we've already had staff out there looking at the location for a Port Wentworth transit center. Now, at this point, the only improvements that'll be made is just bus stop shelters that would be added there, and make sure we have adequate lighting, because we don't want to have folks there at 7 o'clock at night and a dark, rainy night and by themselves. So, but that is part of the Port Wentworth consideration. So a mini transit center, Route 3 and Route 3B will connect there at that location. So, and the consideration of time, let me walk through the service changes as well as I want to make sure you're aware of what's negative about them. I'm going to extol what's positive, but I want to make sure you also know what's negative about it. So let's start with Route 3, West Chatham. And right now, West Chatham goes down Augusta Road as 3B goes down Augusta Road. Very high ridership on Augusta Road section that is close to downtown. We're going to shift Route 3 from Augusta Road over to East Bay Street. And we're going to take because Route 3B goes kind of a loop back into the East Bay Street neighborhood. So Route 3 comes off of Augusta Road. And that means we go from every 30-minute service on Augusta Road to every hour service on that short section of Augusta Road. And so that's why you see I have another pattern on the 3B that is the Groves High School pattern, so we can keep 30-minute service on that section of Augusta Road. What I think is most positive about this section here is that now instead of folks having to ride out to almost Groves High School before they can come back to town, which is how the 3B was configured, you will have on East Bay Street direct service to and from downtown. The other thing that you get from it is Route 3 is going to be going directly to the airport. Now, currently, Route 3 goes to the airport on an around the world tour, right? It comes out Augusta Road, then goes out Jimmy DeLoach, out Benton Boulevard, and then finally gets around to coming back to the airport. So the 40-minute ride to the airport, maybe 30-minute ride to the airport, is an hour and a half because of this loop that you've put into it. It's also Gulfstream employees can really hardly use Route 3 because of this big loop on the end of it. So we're taking the service off of Jimmy DeLoach, and also the area on Jimmy DeLoach. You can't get off on Jimmy DeLoach and walk to those businesses. It just is such a distance that customers have to cross, or crossing Jimmy DeLoach trying to get to a safe bus stop. So that's really why we want that area to be served as a micro transit zone. But I can't change Route 3 until I can get the micro transit zone going, because we don't want to just abandon the riders that we have currently. So it's important that we have both the coordination between what we have currently as the 3 and the 3B with the connection down here on Augusta Road, as well as the connection out here in the west of the airport. Now, Route 3B, again, the existing route turns back on itself. It comes out and then it comes back on East Bay Street and then it goes back. Again, what that really means for folks in East Bay Street is you got to go way out before you can come back to town. So that's where we changed the two of them. But what's important here is that we add a second bus on Route 3B. We have one today. We have a second bus that is the Port Wentworth extension. Now, you're going to be considering an intergovernmental agreement with Port Wentworth. The operating expenses for that extra bus, roughly $450,000, but we have an area that's paying the tax out there already. Our portion, a small area that's already paying the tax. And so, and Faye, it's where Wayfair is. What's the name of the Wayfair business park?
Oh, I don't remember it. I don't recall it.
But they're paying because they're actually on the city line.
They are in the county portion, and the county is assessing. It's where the Wayfair Distribution Center is, and the International Trade Port
Yeah.
Area. And so we calculated the full cost of this Port Wentworth extension and then subtracted a little bit. And so we're asking Port Wentworth for a $400,000 contribution towards the service.
Oh, there may be some modification to that, and that's why I mentioned that to you earlier today, and I want to be sure to be clear with the board. That may still be exactly how we proceed, but there, again, we're still, this started with the Garden City issue that related to Rose Nye Hill that we've been making sure you all were in the loop on. And there is the chairman and I have been working together on it with the county, and I think that the part of what we're looking at is an alternative arrangement where this would be wholly funded with, as I said, general fund money. Management or maintenance and operations funding, M&O funding. So it would be wholly funded that way through the local jurisdiction without necessarily the tax district engaged. But regardless, it would still be done through an IGA, and it would still cover our cost. So in other words, just know that is still that part of the conversation. We're still working closely with all the attorneys involved and with the local jurisdictions and with the county's leadership to make sure that we come to a really solid, determination on it.
Are they agreeable to that?
Is who agreeable?
Is Port Wentworth agreeable to that?
They are indeed.
Okay, just want to make sure because, we've been through so much in the past with the smaller municipalities that had not opted in. And the whole reason was they didn't want to have to pay. So I wanted a little clarification there.
No, I appreciate that question, Director Stone. That was that actually, this whole expansion into Port Wentworth has completely been driven by Port Wentworth. Obviously, they thought that we were ready and they were a willing partner and so forth, but their needs and determination of their needs with regard to their growth and a desire to have transit in their jurisdiction has been a local jurisdiction initiative. So again, we're just sort of working through with both our legal team, with the county's legal team, with the jurisdictional legal teams, as well as with the leadership from each of those, working through how do we finalize agreements that can move all of both Garden City and Port Wentworth forward and serve as a solid foundation piece for any other jurisdictions that may choose to opt in. So I just wanted to be aware, put a pin in that that's still a little bit of a work in progress, but a substantially solid approach.
But we're saying
All right.
Port Wentworth's going to pay into the tax base. Is that what we're saying? All of Port Wentworth is going to pay?
Port Wentworth's agreement will cover any area that the cost of the service that we're providing, we will enter into an agreement with the city of Port Wentworth.
Which is separate from the tax?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's what I want to make clear, because it
Yes,
sounds
ma'am.
like, I wasn't clear, and when Director Stone asked the question, then I thought we were saying that everybody's going to pay into the tax, but we're not saying that.
No, ma'am. It's not that
Right,
everybody will
that's
pay into
why-
the tax, but anyone who's getting service, the city will be, the city will be a participant in whatever the cost is of the service that we're going to provide to them. And as the service expands maybe within their jurisdiction over time and those costs go up, that will be renegotiated.
I guess, for me visually, I'm thinking that we get a check from Chatham County for transit, right? So we will not be getting a check from Port Wentworth for transit. Is that what I'm, that's
Well,
what
it
I'm
wouldn't,
saying?
it wouldn't have come from Port Wentworth anyway. It would have come from the county through their collection. Ms. Cutter, do you want to comment on this a little bit?
If it's a matter of taxing within the transit district.
Right.
It will come from Chatham County. If it's an intergovernmental agreement, it will come from the general fund of the municipality.
That's what I wanted to make sure, because I wasn't hearing that. I was hearing it, but I wasn't clear, yes.
One quick question, is it actually a check? Or do they like
Depends upon how
Venmo
we
you?
have it set up. We have it both ways. Chatham
Always
County is
wondered.
electronic,
Mm,
and Garden City, it may be via check.
big check.
Just-
Damn. I had another question, but I'll remember it.
But one of the things that I want to emphasize here on timing of these Route 3B and the 3 improvements is we've got microtransit that's an important part of when we can move forward, and we have the intergovernmental agreement with Port Wentworth that's important for it to move forward. At this point in this plan, I show this in March. It may end up having to slip until July because of those agreements.
My question is, are we holding up this intergovernmental agreement, or trying to figure out microtransit?
With Port Wentworth?
Yeah.
No, we're not holding it up. We're collaborating on it. We're nearing completion on that. We've got to make an adjustment based upon that meeting that we had last Friday with the county's leadership and the legal teams, again, making it consistent with Garden City and Port Wentworth. But we expect to be able to bring the Port Wentworth agreement to you, I would say certainly by the October meeting. And then their expectation is, with the board's approval, if the board approves it, that it would go into place in March.
And Garden City has already been straight. Still working on that too.
We still got some kinks to work out.
Now, we're providing the service in Garden City, and it's being paid for under the agreement that we have under the IGA as it sits today, but we're looking at a modification to that to address the Rose Nye Hill issue.
My question with that is, it serves more than Rose and Hill, right?
Yes, that's the problem.
That's the problem, that's right, or the opportunity.
Okay, let's go to Route 4, South Side. So what on Bernard, we currently have reintroduced Route 4. Remember, Route 4 was canceled entirely beginning in November. By December, we got one bus operating 8 hours a day back on Route 4. It's every 2 hours. It's very infrequent service. Now, what we would like to see is increasing Route 4 in the leg that goes over, got it back up, doggone it. Jim, what did you just do? Hit the wrong button. There we go. Okay. Route 4, we need for it to serve the portion between Montgomery Cross Mall and the Oglethorpe, or Montgomery Cross Walmart and the Oglethorpe Mall. We need Route 4 to provide this service frequently if we're going to cut Route 31 from that area. So we want to time the second bus on Route 4 at the same time as we're removing Route 31 across the Eisenhower and Montgomery Cross area. Then we ultimately add another leg on Route 4 that goes south to the mall, but is all in turn, or to the Walmart rather, that is intended to serve the south side area. Now, this second leg on the 4, and we call it the 4B south side, that probably doesn't occur until about 2028. So it's not near term. What we got to make happen near term is we need the frequency over here so that we can enable the Route 31 to become a 30-minute frequency service. Now, Route 6 is known as the Crosstown route. There are two right now it's every hour that the cycle runs. We want to reduce the cycle so it's every it's done in 90-minute for the cycle, and with 2 buses, we can have a 45-minute frequency. In order to do that, we cut out a portion of the route on King George Boulevard, very low ridership on this section of King George Boulevard, and we also reduce the circulation around the mall. And by reducing those distances, we can make it so that with the same 2 buses, instead of once an hour service, it's once every 45-minute service. I'm going to try to go quicker. The Route 10 East Savannah is every hour service today out to Wilmington, Island, and White Marsh. Honestly, there's not much in the way of ridership that we've had on White Marsh and Wilmington Island. What we want to be able to do is cut the route shorter at the Walmart and at the high school. We'll have to make sure the high school is part of that alignment. And by cutting it back shorter, we can make it from a 2-hour cycle to an hour cycle, or hour and a half cycle, a 90-minute cycle. And we put 3 buses on it, gets us to the 30-minute frequency through East Savannah. I really think this route will do very well at a 30-minute frequency, but it needs the micro-transit out here on the islands, or we've got to make a decision just to cut out the service on White Marsh and Wilmington Island.
It's Whitmarsh.
Thank you, thank you. Clint corrected me last meeting on Candler versus Chandler.
Yes.
And, right, and so I had to give my excuse that my daughter was marrying a Chandler and not a Candler. And, but at any rate, I apologize for my pronunciation problems. Yes, sir?
It's confusing because it has E.
You're right, it is.
And I go by Clinton.
Okay. So that's what the idea is on Route 10. On Route 11, Candler, Savannah State, we actually put this service in place. And right here on LaRoche, I want to point out there is this public housing or this subsidized housing community right here at the corner of LaRoche and Durant. That's all part of the reason for extending the route as we have.
But isn't that a turnaround where 31 would go down to Ren? Right at that line?
Yes, 31 also goes down to Ren and down here, and will continue to. We decided not to change 31 in that area. The 11 Candler, we've got it just with 10 hours of service a day right now. It's an increase from what it had been in the past, but I'd like to see us get to 2 buses on the route it's probably going to be closer to 2026 that we get the second bus on the 11. The 12 Henry, we'd already made this change. Route 12 used to extend to the islands and through Thunderbird because Thunderbird was not paying.
Thunderbolt.
Thunderbolt, thank
It's
you.
getting late in the day, Jim.
It is getting late in the day.
Somebody get him some water. Coffee.
Yeah, I need some more coffee, I think, is what the problem is. The route has already been cut short, but we did just talk about, the challenge ends up being serving the backside of Savannah State and the high school there. And boy, if we could get that revisited on the tax basis, that I think is an important change here that I don't show on the 12.
Bob, isn't part of Shell Road in the city? You know, right there at Johnson. Right, yeah, because it doesn't, it's outside of Thunderbolt, but you know, those lines are so close.
Yeah.
But I think the one that leads into the athletic part of Johnson is within the city, within the tax base. I would think, Bobby.
But, so at any rate, now, I want to point out something right here on this slide. You see, this route is at 11.6 miles per hour. As a little bus transit planner, now 50 years ago, Al Kays, who was the manager with Duke Power Company that I worked for, said the one thing to remember when you're planning bus service, 12 miles an hour is the correct speed. If you'll always plan bus routes around an average speed of 12 miles an hour, the bus operators can make it. Now, if we
That's
extended,
really helpful to know.
it is. If you
On
extended,
average,
yeah, on average, 12 miles an hour is the operating speed. And if we were to extend over here, we can't get it in the hour frequency at 12 miles an hour. And when we push the driver at 13 and 14 and 15 miles an hour, they can't make the schedules. And 12, but at any rate, 12 miles an hour is what is important here. I can't get it quite far enough to get it out to the high school.
I've been on this board, I think, for like 5 or 6 years now, and that's the first time I've ever heard that, which is such a key piece of information.
You want
That's so interesting.
to schedule the service so it is at a clock frequency every hour, every half hour, every 90 minutes, every 2 hours. And you want to always schedule it, if you can, at 12 miles an hour. Now, some of them, you know, the route out Ogeechee Road, you can run faster because you've got a little bit more travel speed. But generally, you want to make any of your in-town city routes at 12 miles an hour. Okay.
Jim, before you talk about Abercorn, I wanted to remind the board that on Abercorn and in a few more slides, you're going to see Waters. Remember that we also have a project with GDOT on both of those corridors where they're going to be doing transit signal preemption for us with the city of Savannah. It's about $1 million project, 100% funding. And there, I think you've seen on the last couple of snapshots, there's a delay right now because of equipment coming in. But as soon as that equipment comes in, you'll see those improvements on both this Abercorn route and on the Waters route too, that will facilitate the operations of transit in this corridor as well as smooth overall traffic flow.
Okay, on the 14 Abercorn, you'll see the average speed is at 9.6 miles an hour. Well, part of it is the high congestion on the road, but I actually think we could do just a little bit more on the 14 than what we're showing. We are back to 5 buses on the service, and it's routed to go by the VA clinic before it gets to Walmart and then go back by the VA clinic. And let me use that as an example of one of the important parts of transit service planning. Don't do a loop at the end of the route. When you do these big loops, all you do is cause customers to have to ride longer, because one direction you can get there directly, but then if you have a big loop, you got to go through loop. And so this is an example where if you had a loop here, your VA customers would have a direct service there, but then you have to ride around this big loop before you can come back. So that's the primary change there. But at this point, this route's doing very well, and I don't suggest any more changes for it. 17, Silk Hope. Um, the corridor does really very well on ridership. It's a 2-hour cycle, 120-minute cycle, and you can see it's running pretty fast at 20.1 miles an hour. And we'd like to cut out the portion of the route on Quaco Road. It's a good ridership area on Quaco Road, but we'd like to cut that area out and serve it with microtransit instead. And what that really does when you cut out this extra section on Quaco Road, that you're able to, will be reducing the average speed from 20 miles an hour to probably around 18, or around 16 miles an hour. Now, another thing that's going on Route 17 is there is a neighborhood that is at the end of Martin Luther King that we can't serve because of a underweight or weight restricted bridge on Ogeechee Road. It's a 3-ton restricted bridge that keeps us from serving this neighborhood. It's at a creek that's right in here. And I'm not convinced that I've got the right alignment on the 17, and I want to have a little bit more discussion with the operations staff, because I think we can do better than the way we have the 17 running. The 25. You see on the 25, you see this apartment complex. It's 360 units. And the way we have the route right now is the route comes out, goes one way here, and customers have to ride all the way out to these county buildings, and they come back and they go across Savannah, or Chatham Parkway is the name of that roadway. And so what we want to change is make this 2-directional, so the customers at that apartment complex can ride either to town or to the county buildings in the linear route and not have to go through the extra loop on the end. That is really the line of route change that we have here. We also have over here at Exchange a small change that we made in July that bus drivers asked for a safe turning movement. This is one that I think if we can get 30-minute service back, we'll have substantial ridership growth on the 25. The 27 and the 28, what we're trying to do with the 27 and 28 is switch which one is serving the hospital. Remember, we returned service on Route 11 to the hospital, and we want 28 to serve the Candler Hospital, and we want the 27 to stay up and down Waters and become every 30-minute service between the mall and downtown. We do that again just by taking a little bit of circulation off at Candler Hospital. We're able to make the route within a 90-minute cycle. So we're shortening the route so that we can improve the frequency, and then we add one more bus to it to get us to a 30-minute frequency. The 28, we currently have one bus on the 28. We want to add a second bus to it so the 28 can get down to an hour frequency. Right now it's a 2-hour frequency. The second bus will get the 28 to an hour frequency. Now, the 31, I rode out on the 31 with the bus operator, and boy, we had to hustle on the route to make the entire distance. And so what I wanted to propose doing is cutting the 31 at the mall so that, or at the Walmart, so that riders that want to continue onto the mall would either have to transfer to the 4 or to the 28 at the Walmart. That's why it's important we get the frequency on the 4 from every 2 hours to every hour. It still will be some inconvenience for customers that have been using it from the corridor over to, and the heading on my slide is incorrect. It's not the 31 MLK Boulevard, it's Skidaway. I apologize for that. I didn't notice it until just now. But that is the negative aspect of improving frequency on Skidaway. We reduce the frequency, or at least we'll be able to keep it at once an hour between the Walmart and the Oglethorpe Mall. We've mentioned microtransit. It's an important part of the overall plan, both for the 3 zones initially, and the 3 zones initially are to be a airport area or Jimmy DeLoach, a Silk Hope, and a East Savannah zone, and then ultimately a 4th zone that will be out on the islands.
And just a reminder for the board, where we are working so diligently with this is, remember, when we start that implementation next spring, well, like I said, some early implementation with paratransit, but once we really get these rolling next spring, that positions them for the much larger SMART grant implementation dollars that, again, remember, we're in a very small pool of candidates because of our high performance, high ranking in this initial award to seek those dollars that really give us some strong implementation opportunities for the future.
Okay, just a couple more slides. This is just showing the service plan phases and showing where we are right now, and it looks like I cut off the bottom row a little bit. The existing in 23, we're at 27 peak buses, 360.5 hours, 59 operators. Would like to see us grow in the 24-25 period to having 33 peak buses, 480 hours, 102 bus operators. So Manny, you got some hiring to do to get us up to that 102. In the shorter term, by 28 or so, I'd like to see us get to 37 peak buses, 114 operators. I want to note that in 2018, we were at 40 peak buses and 550 revenue hours, so roughly the same place that I'd like to see us in 2028. And then maybe by 2030, 5 more peak buses to 43, 600 plus revenue hours.
And keep in mind, our overall ridership, though, could grow in the shorter term phases even though all these recommendations are really about the fixed route. Keep in mind that the microtransit implementation that will be occurring all along, our ridership can actually grow much higher than just back to the number of revenue hours where Jim's talking about, in 2028 or 2026, 28, getting us back to where we were in 2018. We actually could be at a higher level of service with the microtransit ridership that we expect to be very strong in terms of CAT's overall profile and so forth.
Okay, so what are next steps? This was the same as the earlier slide. Questions, revisions.
So,
The approval of the equity analysis?
yeah, Jim, a couple things, let me comment on this. So the way we have envisioned this is on the Title VI equity analysis. The plan is to bring that before the board at the August meeting for approval. Again, that is the one item that our policy requires board's approval. Our policy, CAT's policies do for a number of these things, but on the FTA side, that is one thing that FTA requires us to do. As you know, we also have our triennial review coming up, and we have service modifications that have occurred since 2019 that we're catching up in this particular Title VI equity analysis and review, and we'd like to have that available and incorporated into the records for that triennial review, and to be within that 1 year of when we started temporary service mods related to service reliability, driver shortages coming out of COVID and so forth. So the Title VI equity analysis, which was that more bite-sized piece at the very beginning, a much more straightforward analysis, would be presented to you in August. But we are allowing, just as we did with the master transit plan, more time. This, as you've seen with what Jim's presented today, even with the deck, the more condensed deck, this is a lot of information, and we want the board to have ample time, as much time as you need to absorb the TDP COA work, and to look at all of these suggestions and to give us the benefit of, as Jim stated at the very beginning, the benefit of your good suggestions and thoughts and ideas and comments and so forth, as we bring that forward potentially in the September meeting then for your review. And again, we still are going to be working on bus stop improvements and the service implementation matters that are already in the queue.
Before we get to the next step, did we get any feedback from Georgia Southern and the city of Savannah on that route that goes behind Georgia Southern? You know, remember we spoke about that route going on Georgia Southern instead of that road, that dark road back there.
Right.
And also the buses going down Windsor Road because it's so narrow.
Right.
And if on Mondays and Tuesdays when there's trash and recyclable pickup, that route is going to be late every Monday and Tuesday.
So I'll comment on Georgia Southern first and then let Jim describe to you what we did on Windsor Road as well. But we have looked at both and appreciated the comments that I believe both you and Director Odell brought forward on that earlier. We had a meeting scheduled with Georgia Southern to discuss the on-campus activity. They had to reschedule, and so we are still working with them on how we might bring forward an on-campus activity, CAT service and so forth. But we are in conversation with them to reset that meeting, and that is underway. And again, it was canceled because of something that they had come up, Director, but we did schedule that following your suggestion. And then Jim, talk a little bit about the Windsor Forest. You know, we've dealt with the community there. We've certainly had numerous conversations over the last several weeks with the neighborhood groups there. And we have put forward a improvement there or service modification there that they are very supportive of. So.
And also, another concern is all those trees. If they say, you know what, it's fine to go down Windsor Road, we spoke about those trees that's overhanging.
Right.
It's going to tear up the buses, because I know as the paratransit buses go down there, they get hit. The bigger buses, you'll be painting the buses every 3 months.
Absolutely, and we've made note of that and are coordinating on how that tree canopy can be addressed as a potential issue there. Jim, did you want to talk about Windsor Forest specifically? Thank you for the comments.
Coming down and going across Windsor Forest. Windsor Forest folks reacted and said, please use instead the connector, the Abercorn connector, and use Abercorn for that alignment. And so that is what is showing here now for the Route 4 is we are on Abercorn and using the Abercorn connector instead of Windsor Forest.
And so then you would come down Abercorn and then come up Largo in order to get to the backside of.
No, we don't go to the backside of the campus at all. Now,
Okay.
We're trying to get the stop on the front side of campus to, so that we can pull the bus stop off of Abercorn and onto campus. That's what we're trying to have the meeting with the university with before we start showing that as a revised alignment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Taylor. Appreciate those comments.
Can I make one suggestion?
Yes, ma'am.
As it relates to reporting on the plan, I would suggest that, I think it's part of, COO's, reporting, is that can we have just regular updates on how the plan is proceeding or not proceeding? Because I think we need to be kept abreast of the good, the bad, and the ugly, because I like the idea when you spoke about being flexible, because, we just don't know what's gonna happen. So I think it's more, as often as we get updated on how things are going, I think it'll be real helpful forward.
Director Robinson, maybe what we could do, and I think that's an excellent suggestion, is you remember you had also asked for an update, the same kind of update on the progress and implementation of the master transit plan. Is I think what we could do is we can coordinate between
Well, I was kind of talking about
planning
those.
and COO to do companion reports every board meeting, so you can see how they're fitting together, but you can also see that incremental progress that's being made. So I think that between COO and Chief of Planning, when she gets here, I think we can make sure that's addressed.
In the Title VI equity analysis, on page 28, is a section that is the planned service changes. And this goes by driver's run assignment as to what is planned. Now, this morning, meeting with staff, I'm going to have to back off a little bit of the first changes that I was planning on for this November. But it's really this section that I hope you get a report on every period. But that lays out what at least my thinking was in putting this together. And I'm sure it will change as you work to implement.
I saw some dates that talk about the fall of 2024. When overall, which is not included here. There are some dates of implementation the fall of 2024.
We've got some implementation in fall. What I was planning on for fall of '23 that's in here. So that's this November. Like to see Route 25 go to every 30 minutes. I would love to see the 27 and the 28 change their alignment, and then that go to every 30 minutes. And then we were planning on introducing one more bus on the downtown shuttle, the 7F. I don't think we're going to have the bus operators to do all of that. And so we're probably going to try to do just the service increase in the 25 to make that happen. Then you'll see in next March, what we planned on is the 3 and the 3B, but the microtransit doesn't look like it's going to be ready to March. So I think that's going to have to slide until July. But this laid out at least the increments that I think you would get the most ridership and the best reaction from. But I'm convinced that the number of bus drivers that we're going to have is really going to dictate the pace that we can do these improvements.
And I think one of the things that I appreciate is when we did the downtown shuttle into the historic areas that we did not exit, we did not take out any stops, that the folks are still getting what they've been getting all the time.
Well, now, there are a couple of stops, there are about 6 stops in Carver Heights and Cloverdale that there are almost no ridership that are right in somebody's front yard. And so the city is going to put up new signs on it, and we were planning on stopping a few of those stops, but no change in the alignment, same routing. I think everyone will still be able to get service. It's just some of those stops are right in people's
And
front yard.
we did that with input from the neighborhood.
But the issue is the distance they have to go from their house to a stop. So I just think that we need to be careful and listen to what they're saying.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And the staff was actually at the neighborhood meetings.
We've been at the last 2 and talked about this very specific issue at the last 2. So, but we will continue to do so because, Dr. Robinson, I know that even if there's a certain, sort of viewpoint right now, it could change as the operations actually occur. Somebody's needs could change. And so the notion that we're just going to have to keep listening to the neighborhood is going to be really important, and we're going to do that.
But the alignment is all the same, and I think people will be able to use the stops that they have been using.
The drivers, you said earlier that the drivers participated in one of the stops. Did the drivers participate in pretty much this whole plan for a better route, a better turnaround?
Yes, sir. I've had multiple meetings with bus operations team. We've done it around the run picks and redoing the schedule. We're supporting it in the schedule work too. And so I've had 3 separate meetings with the union, and then we did a couple of days where I sat in the driver's room and listened to folks, and that's where a lot of the ideas came from. But I'm not convinced that we've heard the end of it. I'm sure there will be more good ideas from the bus operators.
It's nothing like the on-hand experience.
Absolutely.
I have two questions. I'd love to learn more about the MPC plan review and like, can we veto projects? I don't think that's necessarily a good idea, but like what powers are there and how does that work?
My understanding is that what we're working with both the city and MPC on right now is the ability to just review and comment
Okay.
and be able to say, this area needs a stop, or this area means because of what you're going to do here, we may need to realign some of our stops and think about exactly how those kinds of things are working. And we need for the developer to be required to,
Yes. Yeah.
but we're going to be in a recommendations role,
Got it.
not in an approval.
I'm just
veto
because I feel
role.
like so much of this is based on Savannah Transit Authority, when it converted into Chatham Area Transit, didn't really change that many of its routes, and it was designed as a very, very urban, pretty dense. And this is just, and now we're sort of turning from a urban dense to a regional transit authority, and that's a painful process, I think, and it's expensive because we're chasing both frequency and area at the same time. So that's fun. And then my other thing was on the times that I've ridden Route 14, I've realized that there are some bus stops that are very close to each other. They're like 2 blocks away, and that just seems a bit redundant. And so I also think during the review of bus stops, in order to both speed up stops and reduce the inventory so that we can better maintain less, making sure that we don't have too many stops at the same time. And if we're thinking about access is 1/3 of a mile away, is it 1/3 of the mile on up and down the route? Does that make sense? So it's kind of like if 2 bus stops are less than 1/3 of a mile from each other, are they redundant? And what is our thinking about that? So they're like 2 blocks away on some sections of Route 14, and that's just a little crazy.
On Route 14, when we change stops, we've got to think through the traffic signal priority as well.
Mm-hmm.
On traffic signal priority, the bus has a beacon in it, and it's communicating with the traffic signal. And it's saying, I'm coming, and the traffic signal is supposed to hold the green and allow the bus to get through the traffic signal. On Cobb Parkway in Cobb County, that Fay was all part of, we did traffic signal priority all down Cobb Parkway. But if you don't change the location of the bus stop, it doesn't get you anything.
It doesn't get you anything.
If you're saying, I'm coming, the light stays green, but then the bus stops at a bus stop just before the traffic
Is on the
signal,
near side.
Mm.
We learned.
you've killed everything.
Yeah.
So you want the bus stops to be far side right? And when you're planning, you want it to be far side.
So it gets you something, oops,
So,
gets you
so we
something when you
get the
clear that
priority
intersection.
from the signal. And we've got to make sure,
That's smart.
or we passed the Americans with Disabilities Act 30 years ago. We got to make our bus stops ADA accessible. And it's relatively simple. It's a 5-foot by 8-foot concrete pad that we've got to have for the bus stops. But when we rationalize the number of bus stops, signal priority and ADA need to be part of that equation too.
And the pads generally, one thing Jim and I are gonna poke at each other, I think, a little bit on this, is the pads sound really simple, but oftentimes they're not.
Oh, that's
Because of either right-of-way, drainage, some other kind of issue there that you've got to, implementation of that stuff is never an easy task. But I do think that is one of the things that we have made sure to emphasize in the description of that work, is the importance on the ADA side, and the importance of, frankly, there's also this goes back to our equity, how equity, inclusion is driving, that is our strong lens on everything, is that, everyone needs to be able to wait in a dignified, safe place. And we have a lot of work to do there, in addition to ADA compliance, in addition to all these other things that we've talked about. Lots of opportunity. But that is something that we're also being very thoughtful about in terms of how we're looking at the bus stops. And again, as Jim mentioned, that signal prioritization project that we'll be getting from GDOT on those two, strong ridership corridors with Abercorn and Waters, once it gets in, and once we make some of the adjustments in the stops that are going to be needed for that to work effectively, and once we get a lot of the suggestions that are in here moving in place, it's going to be remarkable how much it will impact our service. And the other thing about it is when the buses are moving more efficiently, guess what else is? Everybody that's in the lanes with them. And so you're going to see a noticeable improvement in those corridors that I think is going to be just appreciated in the community, and it's safer. Okay.
Well,
Thank you
yeah,
very
that's-
much
yeah.
for that. Director Odell, can she hear? Okay. Director Odell, thank you very much for that comment. Appreciate it.
I've made you sit through my ideas for 2 hours. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to me now. I've continued to support your scheduling and your planning for a while. And I'm glad if you have questions, direct them to staff, they'll get them to me, or if you want me to come by and sit with you in a one-on-one meeting to better understand these changes. There will be customers that are not necessarily happy with all of these changes. And it's really important that as we march them out, that we listen. And maybe we will have made some mistakes. So at any rate, I'm ready and willing to come back and talk with you in any way I need to help you make these plans effective.
I thank you for coming in today and having a very good informative meeting with us to keep us apprised of what's going on. I think that we have a very good plan that we're coming up with. I want to make emphasis to our main problem I believe we are facing, and that's the driver shortage. With this great plan that we have, our first plan and priority, I believe, is going to have to be on the drivers. I send kudos out to Dr. Manning for improving us up on our hiring process. And I mean, it's great to see us trying to bring all these people in, but we're going to definitely have to work on our competitive rates with our drivers. We got to make sure we get good benefit packages. We're going to need all of this in order to bring our driver shortage in. And I think once we bring our driver shortage in, we already see we got staff and everybody, we got a great plan. just gotta go to the source so we can get our drivers. Thank you.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think
absolutely.
it is the real crutch. And for the bus drivers, if we can reduce the number of split runs, because when you go to work at 5 o'clock in the morning and you end up
Now.
working until 9 o'clock at night, and then you
It's-
come back the next, if we've got to do all we can to, and it might not be the most efficient always, but if we can have more straight runs, we can retain a lot more bus operators.
And I'll say this, that we did very well this time. It used to be 5 hours spread. And now we talked to Jim, we worked out, now it's about 3 hours. So we're getting there.
We're improving it, yeah.
I see that.
Yeah.
We definitely appreciate it. We know y'all are working hard behind the scenes.
We are.
All right, let's go. Can we go?
All right, I think
Good?
I need to digest all this now.
Thank you
May I
all
have any
very
more
much.
questions? Any?
Is there any questions too about the scheduling that we suggested, the Title VI this month and then the COA TDP next month, to give you ample time to really dig into all of those details? Is that good with the board? Perfect. Thank
Our
you very
next
much.
regular board meeting gonna be August 22nd, 2023 at 11 o'clock a.m. I thank everybody for coming today. We will adjourn this meeting at this time.